My whole life has been built on a foundation of quiet lies. Not the kind you tell to hurt people, but the heavy, suffocating kind you build around a wound to keep it from bleeding out. You learn to walk carefully, to avoid the soft, weak spots in the floor of your own memory. You learn which photographs to keep in the album and which to hide in a box at the back of the closet. You learn to call the empty chair at the dinner table an accident, a tragedy, anything but what it really was. For 20 years, I was an expert in this architecture of silence. And then I became a prosecutor, a professional truth-teller, and I thought I could keep those two worlds, the one of whispered family secrets and the one of shouted courtroom facts, forever separate. I was a fool. The day it all began to crack was a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays are for arraignments, a relentless parade of human failure and desperation. My office was a monument to order, a sanctuary of case files and legal pads, a place where chaos was sorted into manila folders and bound with rubber bands. I was Senior Assistant District Attorney Elena Rostova, and my reputation was built on being ice-cold, unshakable. I didn't get emotionally invested. I got convictions. The walls of my office were lined with legal books, their spines cracked and worn from use, and on my desk sat a single, framed photo of my parents, taken on their 40th wedding anniversary. Their smiles were tight, their eyes holding a sadness that the camera couldn't quite capture, a sadness I understood all too well. There were no pictures of Sophia. Her image existed only in the private gallery of my mind, a place I rarely dared to visit. My junior, Ben, a bright-eyed kid who still believed in the inherent goodness of the system, buzzed my intercom. His voice always had a slight tremor of excitement, as if every case was a new puzzle from the gods of justice. Elena, they need you in Judge Henderson's courtroom. They're setting bail on a new homicide. Low-level stuff, a drug deal gone bad in the North End, but the press is sniffing around. The boss wants you on it. I sighed, the sound loud in the quiet of my office. I had been reviewing a complex financial fraud case, a welcome distraction of numbers and loopholes that held no emotional weight. The North End was its own ecosystem of violence, a place where cases were often open and shut, tragic but simple. What's the file? I asked, my voice already shifting into the detached, efficient tone I used for these things. It's thin so far, Ben said. Victim was a Jane Doe, no ID on her. OD'd on a bad batch of fentanyl, but the medical examiner found defensive wounds, signs of a struggle. The dealer they picked up, a guy named Marcus Thorne, is claiming it was an accident, that she attacked him first. The usual. The usual. I repeated the phrase in my head like a mantra as I stood and smoothed the wrinkles from my charcoal gray skirt suit. It was my armor. It was just another case. Another name, another life cut short by the predictable machinery of the streets. I pushed through the heavy wooden doors of my office and into the hallway, the click of my heels on the polished linoleum a familiar, comforting rhythm. I walked the long, polished corridor to the courtroom, my mind already drafting the bail arguments. Denial was a near certainty. Flight risk. Danger to the community. Standard procedure. The courtroom was hushed, the air thick with the smell of old wood, lemon-scented polish, and a faint undercurrent of human anxiety. I took my place at the prosecution's table, not even glancing at the defendant in his ill-fitting, standard-issue jumpsuit. I could feel the weight of his presence beside me, a shapeless form I had no interest in defining. He was a legal problem, not a person. I opened the file, my eyes scanning the cold, clinical text of the initial police report. Time of death estimated between 2 o'clock and 4 a.m. Location, alley behind the old cannery on 5th Street. No witnesses. A small evidence bag recovered at the scene. And then I saw the evidence photo. It was a picture of the victim's personal effects, found scattered near the body. A cheap, disposable lighter. A few crumpled dollar bills. A half-empty packet of tissues. And a necklace. A simple, silver chain with a small, tarnished bird in flight, a swallow. My breath hitched, a tiny, almost imperceptible sound lost in the rustle of the courtroom. It couldn't be. It was a common design. Millions of them existed. My hand trembled as I reached for the next photo, a close-up of the necklace itself, taken against an evidence scale ruler. There, on the swallow's wing, was a tiny, almost microscopic engraving. I knew it was there without even seeing it clearly. I knew because I had held that very bird in my hand 20 years ago, tracing the letters with my fingertip on the night before she vanished. S and E. Sophia and Elena. The world tilted. The polished wood of the table, the judge's bench, the flags standing stiffly in their corners, everything swam in a nauseating blur. The low hum of the fluorescent lights became a deafening roar in my ears. Sophia. My sister. My vibrant, wild, beautiful older sister who had vanished from our lives 2 decades ago, leaving behind only a ghost and a hole in our family that never, ever healed. The official story, the one we told neighbors and concerned friends, was that she'd run away. A rebellious 16-year-old, tired of our strict immigrant parents, their old-world expectations, their fears, seeking a bigger, brighter life somewhere beyond our small, tidy house and its even tidier rules. We'd told that story so many times we almost believed it ourselves. But my mother's eyes, hollowed out with a grief that never faded, knew the truth. My father's silence, a wall that went up the day she disappeared and never came down, knew the truth. And I, the 10-year-old little sister who worshipped her, who believed she hung the moon, knew in the deepest, most terrified part of my soul that Sophia would never have just left me. She would have taken me with her, or she would have written, or she would have called. She promised. And now here she was, reduced to a black and white photo in a murder file. Jane Doe. A statistic. A low-level case. The words on the page blurred. Fentanyl toxicity, antemortem contusions, probable altercation. This wasn't a case file. It was my sister's death certificate, and I was reading it for the first time. I don't know how I got through that arraignment. My body was on autopilot, my voice a stranger's, reciting arguments for denying bail, citing the severity of the charge, the risk of flight. My words were crisp, professional, but inside, I was screaming. I was 10 years old again, sitting on the stairs in my flannel nightgown, my knees pulled to my chest, listening to my parents cry in the kitchen, their voices low and broken. I was staring at the empty bed across from mine, the one with the faded Bon Jovi poster tacked to the headboard. I was the little girl nobody told the whole truth, the one left to piece together the horror from whispered arguments and slammed doors and the terrible, endless quiet that fell over our house like a shroud. Judge Henderson, a kind-faced man with a reputation for fairness and a head of thick white hair, peered down at me over the rim of his glasses. Ms. Rostova, you seem distracted. Are you quite all right? The state's arguments seem a bit perfunctory today. I forced my eyes to meet his, my professional mask slamming back into place with a force that made my head spin. My apologies, Your Honor. I'm fine. The state maintains that given the violent nature of the death, bail should be denied. He nodded slowly, not quite convinced, but he granted my request and set a date for the preliminary hearing. As the bailiff led Marcus Thorne away, the defendant finally turned and looked at me. It was the first time I had truly seen his face. His eyes were not the eyes of a monster. They were the eyes of a scared, tired man, deep brown and shadowed with exhaustion. And in that moment, I didn't see a killer. I saw a thread, the only living thread connecting me to my sister's last moments on this earth. He knew her. He saw her. He was there. He had breathed the same air as her in her final, terrified minutes. The thought was both horrifying and magnetic. Back in my office, I locked the door, my hands shaking so badly I could barely turn the key. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood of the door, trying to steady myself, but it was no use. The dam broke. The sobs were ripped from a place I had sealed shut when I was a child, a raw, guttural sound I didn't even recognize as my own. I slid down to the floor, my expensive suit jacket scraping against the door, and curled into a ball on the cold linoleum. I cried for the big sister who used to braid my hair. I cried for the artist who drew fantastical creatures in the margins of her schoolbooks. I cried for the girl who dreamed of seeing Paris and who loved the smell of the ocean. I cried for the woman she became, the one I never got to know, the one who ended up in a dirty alley with a needle in her arm. Sophia. All these years, I had carried a fragile, secret hope, a tiny, stubborn flame in the darkest part of my heart, that she was out there somewhere, living a happy life, that one day she'd just show up on our doorstep with a suitcase full of stories and that same, brilliant laugh. That hope was now a pile of ash. She was gone. She had been gone for a long, long time, her body lying in a cold drawer under a false name while we pretended to live, while I built a career on the very concept of truth, all the while living the biggest lie of all. Why did I become a prosecutor? People ask me that sometimes at fundraisers or bar association events. I usually give them a polished, practiced answer about the pursuit of justice and civic duty. The real answer is Sophia. The real answer is the helplessness I felt as a child, the way the police, after a few months of perfunctory investigation, stopped returning our calls. The way her case file, which my father obsessively called about every week, went from missing person to runaway in their records. The way the truth didn't seem to matter to anyone but us. The system had failed her. It had looked at a vibrant, complicated girl and seen a problem that had conveniently solved itself. I dedicated my life to being a voice for victims because my sister never had one. I built a fortress of law and order, of rules and procedures, to protect myself from the chaos that stole her. And now, the chaos was inside the fortress walls, and it had her name. The next few days were a special kind of hell, a waking nightmare where I had to function as a human being while my soul was being shredded. I had to go through the motions. I assigned Ben to do the initial legwork on the Thorne case, telling him I was swamped with the pretrial motions for the financial fraud case, a complex web of deceit that now felt trivial, almost laughable. I listened to his reports with a detached, clinical ear, all while my heart was pounding a frantic, painful rhythm against my ribs. The ME confirmed the fentanyl was lethal, but the bruising on her wrists and arms is consistent with a physical altercation, Ben said, his voice buzzing through the speakerphone on my desk. I stared at the framed photo of my parents, wondering if I would ever be able to look them in the eye again. No witnesses, though. The location was a known dead zone for cameras. It's her word against his. Her word. She didn't have a word. She was a Jane Doe. A silence. A question mark. And the identity? I asked, my voice miraculously steady, a triumph of will over emotion. Any progress? Nothing. No matches in any database. Dental records came back with no hits. It's like she didn't exist. She's a ghost. She existed, I screamed inside my head. She existed, and she was everything. She was real, and she was loved, and she is mine. I knew what I had to do. The legal ethics manual might as well have been open on my desk, the relevant passage highlighted in bright yellow. I had to go to my boss, District Attorney Robert Carson, and recuse myself from the case immediately. It was the ethical thing, the only thing to do. A conflict of interest this profound was a bomb waiting to go off in the middle of a trial. It was grounds for disbarment. But as I stood outside his office, my hand raised to knock on his mahogany door with a polished brass nameplate, I froze. My fingers hovered just inches from the wood. If I recused myself, the case would be handed to another attorney. Maybe someone good, like Angela Simmons, who was relentless but overworked. Maybe someone lazy, like Tom Higgins, who was counting the days until his pension kicked in. It would become just another file on another desk, one of dozens. They would see a nameless, faceless addict and a small-time dealer. They would look at the evidence, see the defensive wounds, but they would also see the drugs. They might even offer him a plea deal. Manslaughter. A reduced sentence for a guilty plea. My sister's murderer might walk free in a few years. The truth of her death, the violence of it, would be buried forever under the convenient, dismissive label of an overdose during a struggle. She would remain Jane Doe, and the world would never know that Sofia Rostova had lived, and loved, and been failed by everyone, including me. I couldn't let that happen. This was my case. My sister. My truth to tell. My cross to bear. I walked away from Carson's door, my heels making no sound on the thick hallway carpet. It was the first conscious step off the cliff of my career, my ethics, my entire life. I was going to prosecute this case. I was going to look Marcus Thorne in the eye and demand justice for Jane Doe, and only I would know I was demanding it for Sofia Rostova. I would be the ghost in the machine, steering the wheels of justice for my own, deeply personal reasons. The investigation became my secret obsession, a double life I led in the shadows of my own existence. By day, I was the cool, collected ADA, managing my other cases, attending meetings, mentoring Ben. By night, after the office had emptied out and the cleaning crew's vacuum hummed in the distance, I was a grieving sister, poring over every scrap of evidence in the Thorne file, every photo, every line of every report. I committed it all to memory. The exact location of the bruise on her left wrist. The composition of the fentanyl mixture. The timestamp on the patrol car's dispatch log. I went to the medical examiner's office alone, late in the evening when the halls were empty and echoed with a profound, chilling silence. The attendant, a weary-looking man named Frank who had seen more death than any soldier, slid the drawer open with a metallic rumble that seemed to tear through the quiet. There she was. Time and a hard life had not been kind. The vibrant, laughing girl I remembered, with her sun-streaked hair and eyes the color of the summer sky, was gone, replaced by a waxy, pale effigy. Her cheekbones were too sharp, her skin stretched tight. But it was her. The shape of her face, the high arch of her brow, the slight bump on the bridge of her nose from when she fell off her bike at age 7. There was a small, faded tattoo on her ankle, a little stylized sun, that I remembered her getting with her friend Maria with her saved-up allowance money, an act of rebellion that had sent my mother into a fit of rage and tears. I reached out, my fingers hovering just above her cold cheek. I didn't touch her. I couldn't. The chasm between the memory of her warmth, the way she'd hugged me so tight I could barely breathe, and this cold, still reality was too vast, too horrifying to bridge. "Do you know her?" Frank asked, his voice gentle, devoid of curiosity, just a simple, human question in a place that was anything but. I shook my head, the lie tasting like acid on my tongue. "No. Just a tragedy. She looks so young." He nodded, sliding the drawer closed with a final, thudding sound that felt like a door slamming shut on my childhood. They always do. Back in my car, sitting in the dark, concrete cavern of the parking garage, I took the small evidence bag containing her personal effects. I held the necklace. The silver was cold in my palm, but as I closed my fingers around it, I could almost feel a phantom warmth, the ghost of her skin. I remembered the day she got it. She was 16, I was 10. She'd saved up for months, babysitting and working a few hours at the local grocery store. She'd taken the bus downtown by herself, a huge adventure. She came back, her eyes shining with a pride and independence I adored. "It's a swallow," she'd told me, holding it out on her palm for me to see. "See how it's in flight? They always find their way home, no matter how far they fly. This one is for me, and this one," she'd said, pointing to the tiny, delicate engraving, "is for you. So we're always together, even when we're not." She never got the chance to buy the second one. A week later, she was gone. The preliminary hearing was a formality, a necessary step on the path to trial. The courtroom was less crowded this time, just the essential players. Marcus Thorne sat with his lawyer, Ms. Flores, a competent and fiercely dedicated public defender who was known for fighting for her clients tooth and nail. I argued my points, my voice like steel, laying out the facts of the struggle, the lethal dose, the abandoned body. I was relentless. I was brutal. I referred to my sister only as the victim or Jane Doe. I reduced her to a set of facts, a collection of injuries and toxicology reports, a puzzle to be solved. It was the only way I could stand there without breaking down, without screaming her name to the rafters. Judge Henderson watched me closely throughout the proceeding. I could feel his gaze, thoughtful and weighing, following my every move. He bound Thorne over for trial, as I knew he would. As we were gathering our papers, the rustle of files and the soft clinking of Miss Flores's bracelets the only sounds, he said, "A moment, Ms. Rostova." My blood ran cold. I felt a trickle of sweat trace a path down my spine beneath my silk blouse. I approached the bench, my head held high. "This case," he said, his voice low, "meant only for me. You're pursuing it with unusual vigor. Even for you. Is there something I should know? Something the court should be aware of?" I met his gaze, hoping the fear in my eyes looked like professional intensity. "It's a homicide, Your Honor. I pursue all homicides with vigor. A woman is dead. That deserves our full attention." He nodded slowly, not quite convinced. "The law requires more than vigor, counselor. It requires dispassion. It requires a clear head and an unbiased heart. It requires truth. Remember that. The truth is the foundation of this entire system. Without it, everything we do here is just theater." His words echoed in my mind for days, a haunting refrain. Dispassion. Truth. I had abandoned both. My obsession with the case was starting to bleed into the rest of my life. I was short with Ben, snapping at him over minor typos in a brief. I was distracted in meetings, my mind drifting to that silver swallow necklace locked in my desk drawer. I started avoiding my parents' weekly Sunday dinner calls. How could I talk to them, hear the mundane details of their lives, their worries about the neighbor's overgrown tree or a new recipe my mother was trying, while I carried the weight of their daughter's corpse in my heart? The lie was a physical presence in the room with me, a shroud I wore everywhere I went, its weight bowing my shoulders. I began digging deeper into Sophia's last years, a painful, voyeuristic journey into a nightmare version of my sister's life. Using my prosecutor's access to databases I had no business searching for this purpose, I pulled every record I could find. Arrest reports for sex workers, shelter intake forms, hospital admittances for overdoses or injuries. It was a descent into a hellscape, each document a fresh cut. I saw her name, Sophia Rostova, on a 2-year-old arrest report for solicitation. The photo attached was a gut punch. Her eyes were empty, the bright, mischievous light gone out, replaced by a flat, weary resignation. Her hair was lank, her skin sallow. The wild, beautiful girl was gone, replaced by a haunted woman, a ghost in her own skin. This was what happened after she left. This was the life she fell into. The runaway story was a fairy tale we told ourselves to hide the uglier, more complicated truth. The world had chewed her up and spit her out, and we, her family, had been too wrapped up in our own hurt and shame to find her before it was too late. I tracked down the shelter where she'd stayed most recently, a place called the Harbor. It was a grim, gray building in a part of the city I never went to, a landscape of boarded-up windows and faded hope. The director, a woman named Anya with kind eyes set in a face etched with the lines of 1,000 sad stories, agreed to speak with me. I didn't identify myself as Sophia's sister. I showed her my badge, said I was a prosecutor working on a case involving one of their former residents, a Jane Doe, and showed her the old photo of Sophia from before she disappeared. Jane Doe? Anya said, holding the photo gently. Yes. That's Sarah. She stayed with us on and off for the past year or so. Sweet girl. Quiet. Haunted. You could always see the ghost of the person she used to be, just behind her eyes. Sarah? I asked, my voice a whisper. They often use different names, Anya explained, her tone matter-of-fact, devoid of judgment. It's a form of protection. From their pasts, from the people they're running from, sometimes from themselves. She sighed, a deep, weary sound. She was trying to get clean. She really was. Had a job washing dishes at a diner for a few months. She was proud of that. She talked about saving up enough money to get a real apartment, to maybe go back to school. She talked about wanting to go home. She said she had a little sister she missed terribly. She said she'd left when her sister was just a kid, and she regretted it every day. The air left my lungs in a painful rush. I gripped the edge of her cluttered desk to steady myself, the world tilting once again. She missed me. She thought of me. All this time. Did she ever say why she left home? I managed to ask, the question tearing at my throat. Anya looked at me, her gaze piercing, as if she could see right through my professional facade to the shattered little girl underneath. She didn't have to. You see it a lot here. Something breaks. A trust, a hope, a feeling of safety. Something breaks at home, and they run. They think anywhere has to be better. Sometimes what they're running from is worse than the street. Not always, but sometimes. I left the shelter, Anya's words ringing in my ears like a death knell. Something breaks at home. What broke? Our home wasn't perfect. Our parents were strict, old world, terrified of the dangers of this new country. They fought with Sophia constantly about her friends, her clothes, her music, her dreams of being an artist. They wanted a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer. They wanted safety and respectability. They didn't understand her free spirit, her hunger for experience, her refusal to be boxed in. Was that it? Was it a particularly bad fight that drove her away? Or was it something else, something darker that I, as a child, was shielded from? A secret within the secret? The question swirled in my head, a toxic brew of guilt and grief. The trial date loomed, a dark cloud on my horizon. The pressure was immense, both professionally and personally. I was preparing my witness list, my opening statement, my direct and cross-examinations. I met with Ben in the conference room, the whiteboard covered in our strategy. We have the ME, we have the forensic analyst who will place Thorne at the scene, his prints are on the baggie, and the specific blend of fentanyl matches a batch he was known to be selling, I said, pointing to the flowchart we've created. We paint a picture of a dealer who got careless, who got violent when a transaction went wrong, who valued his product and his freedom over a human life. And the victim? Ben asked, tapping his pen on the legal pad. How do we present her? The defense is going to paint her as an addict, unstable, a person who made risky choices. It'll taint the jury's sympathy. We need to be prepared for that. I felt a surge of white-hot anger, so intense it momentarily blinded me. She was a person, Ben. A human being. Her life had value regardless of her struggles. Her death was not a consequence she deserved. He held up his hands in a placating gesture. I know, Elena, I know. I'm on your side, remember? I'm just playing devil's advocate. We need to humanize her, but without an identity, without a family to put on the stand, it's hard. She's a blank slate, and the defense will write whatever they want on it. I can humanize her, I thought, the words screaming in my mind. I can tell them she loved the smell of rain on hot pavement and would drag me outside to dance in it. That she could draw beautiful, intricate pictures of birds and flowers that looked like they might fly off the page. That she used to let me sleep in her bed when I had nightmares, telling me stories about brave princesses who rescued themselves until I fell asleep. That she loved strawberry ice cream but hated the chunks of real strawberry. That she promised me, the night before she vanished, that she would always find her way back to me. But I said nothing. I just nodded, my jaw clenched so tight it ached. We'll focus on the facts of the crime. The why doesn't matter. The what does. The night before the trial was to begin, I went to see my parents. I hadn't been in over a month, the longest I'd ever gone without visiting. The house was exactly as I remembered it, a time capsule of our lives before the fracture, a museum of our loss. My mother's collection of ceramic angels still lined the mantelpiece, their serene faces a stark contrast to the turmoil within the walls. My father's worn armchair still faced the front window, as if he was perpetually waiting for someone to come up the walk, a vigil he had kept for 2 decades. The air was thick with the smell of my mother's roasted chicken and the faint, floral scent of her perfume, overlaying the deeper, more permanent scent of old regrets. My mother fussed over me the moment I walked in, her hands fluttering like nervous birds, noting that I'd lost weight, that I had dark circles under my eyes. My father asked about work, his standard, safe question, the only part of my life he felt he could acknowledge without trespassing on emotional territory. We sat at the dining table, the 4th chair, Sophia's chair, pulled neatly in, its emptiness a physical force in the room, a presence more felt than any of us. I looked at my parents, at their lined faces, their tired eyes that had seen too much. They had aged wrapped in a shroud of grief, their lives defined not by what was, but by what was missing. They had spent 20 years believing their daughter chose to leave them, that she rejected them and the life they had built for her. Could I really be the one to tell them she was dead? That the runaway was a victim? That she had been living a life of pain and desperation just a few miles away, yearning for home? That I, their good daughter, the one who followed the rules, had known for weeks and said nothing, had chosen the law over family? You're quiet tonight, Lubomaya, my mother said, using the Russian endearment that usually warmed me. My little love. Tonight, it felt like an accusation. Just a big case, I said, pushing my food around my plate, the chicken tasting like sawdust in my mouth. It's difficult. It's taking a lot out of me. My father grunted, not looking up from his plate. You always do what is right, Elena. You are a strong girl. The law is the law. You follow it. You do not let your feelings get in the way. He said it with a finality, a pride in what he saw as my stoicism. It was the highest compliment he could pay me. The law. I was about to break it in the most fundamental way. I was about to subvert the very system I was sworn to uphold, to lie to a judge and a jury, all in the name of a truth I couldn't legally tell. The irony was a bitter pill. Papa, I said, my voice trembling, betraying the calm I was trying to project. Mama, do you ever think about Sophia? I hadn't said her name in this house in years. It hung in the air between us, dangerous and alive. The silence that fell was absolute. It was a living thing, heavy and cold, sucking all the air out of the room. My mother's fork clattered onto her plate, the sound unnaturally loud. My father's jaw tightened, a muscle twitching in his cheek. That is a closed door, Elena, my father said, his voice low and final, a warning. We do not open it. There is no point. It only brings pain. But what if we were wrong? I pressed, a desperate, reckless courage filling me. What if she didn't just run away? What if something happened to her? What if she needed us and we weren't there? Enough. My father's fist came down on the table, making the plates and silverware jump. The water in our glasses sloshed. She made her choice. She left her family. She did not want us. We do not speak of her. We do not. His voice was raw, stripped bare of its usual controlled gruffness, revealing the raw, bleeding wound beneath. Tears filled my mother's eyes, spilling over and tracing paths through her powder, but she said nothing. She never said anything. She just carried the pain, a silent, suffering monument to a loss she was never allowed to properly mourn. In that moment, looking at their faces, rigid with a pain so deep it had become part of their DNA, I understood the true depth of the family's secret. It wasn't just that she disappeared. It was the shame. The cultural shame of a daughter who rejected their ways, the parental shame of not being able to control her, to protect her, the profound, choking shame of her potential fate, which they must have suspected was far worse than the simple, clean story of a runaway. It was easier, less destructive, to believe she chose to leave than to face the horrifying, soul-crushing possibilities of what might have happened to her. Our family's truth was built on a foundation of shame, and it was a foundation that could not bear the weight of what I had to tell them. I left their house that night feeling more alone than I ever had in my life. I was an island, trapped between a past I couldn't change and a truth I couldn't speak, sailing toward a professional and personal cataclysm with my eyes wide open. The first day of the trial was a media circus. The mystery Jane Doe case, with its elements of a forgotten woman and a sordid drug death, had captured the public's morbid imagination. The courtroom was packed. Reporters lined the back wall, their cameras and recorders at the ready. I wore my best, darkest Navy power suit, my armor. I walked to the prosecution's table, my back straight, my face a mask of calm determination, a complete and utter lie. Marcus Thorne sat with his lawyer. He looked cleaner now, in a borrowed button-down shirt, but the fear in his eyes was still there, a caged animal waiting for the blow. Judge Henderson took the bench, his black robes rustling. The room fell silent. "Are the parties ready to proceed?" "The state is ready, Your Honor," I said, my voice clear and strong, belying the earthquake happening inside me. "The defense is ready," Ms. Flores echoed, her voice tight. "Very well. Ms. Rostova, you may begin your opening statement." I stood and walked to the jury box. I looked at the 12 men and women, their faces a mixture of curiosity and solemn duty. This was it. The point of no return. I had prepared a standard, powerful opening, a dry, forceful recitation of the facts designed to paint Marcus Thorne as a callous dealer. But as I opened my mouth, the words died in my throat. I looked at Marcus Thorne, just a man, flawed and scared. I looked at the jury, ordinary people about to hear an extraordinary story. I thought of my sister, cold and nameless in the morgue, her life reduced to a legal strategy. I thought of my parents, living in their self-imposed prison of silence. I thought of the little girl I used to be, who lost her best friend and her hero in one terrible night, and who had been searching for her ever since. The carefully constructed wall between Elena the prosecutor and Elena the sister crumbled into dust, and there was no rebuilding it. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," I began, my voice softer, more hesitant than I had ever allowed it to be in a courtroom. "For the past several weeks, I have stood in this courtroom and before this judge and referred to the victim in this case as Jane Doe. I have talked about her in terms of forensic evidence and time of death and toxicology reports. I have treated her as a puzzle, a set of facts to be entered into evidence. A problem to be solved." I paused, my heart hammering against my ribs so violently I was sure the entire jury could see it. I could see Ben staring at me from the prosecution table, his face a mask of utter confusion and dawning horror. Judge Henderson was watching me, his expression unreadable, but his body was tense, leaning forward slightly. "But that is a lie," I said, and the words, once spoken, seemed to take on a life of their own, echoing in the silent, stunned room. "A lie I have been telling you, and a lie I have been telling myself. Because I know her name." A wave of whispers swept through the courtroom. The reporters in the gallery leaned forward, their pens poised, sensing a seismic shift in the proceedings. "Her name was Sophia," I said, and saying her name aloud in this place, after all these years, felt like a sacrament, a release, a defiance of every rule I had ever lived by. Sophia Rostova. And she was my sister. The gasp in the room was audible, a collective intake of shock. Ben looked like he'd been shot, his face pale. Ms. Flores half rose from her seat, her voice sharp. "Your Honor, I must object. This is highly improper, a blatant violation of procedure and ethics." Judge Henderson held up a hand, his eyes locked on me, his gaze intense, searching. Let her continue, counselor. For the moment. I turned back to the jury, my eyes blurring with tears I no longer fought, letting them fall freely down my cheeks. She was my big sister. She taught me how to tie my shoes, how to whistle, how to stand up to the bullies on the playground. She used to draw pictures of birds for me because she said they were free, and she dreamed of being free, too. She had a laugh that could fill up a whole house, that could make you laugh even when you didn't want to. 20 years ago, she disappeared from our lives. We were told she ran away. We tried to believe that, because the alternative was too terrible to consider. We built a life on that silence. My parents, they never recovered. They live in a house of ghosts, and I became a prosecutor, I think, to try and make sense of a world that could just swallow a beautiful girl whole and forget her. I took a shaky breath, my composure fraying, the professional facade gone, leaving only the raw, grieving sister underneath. The man sitting there, I said, pointing to Marcus Thorne, my voice gaining strength, not from legal training, but from a deep, primal love. He didn't just sell her drugs that ended her life. He was there for her last moments. He saw her. He knew she was a person, with a name, with a story. And when she died, he left her in an alley like a piece of trash. He made her a Jane Doe. But she was not a Jane Doe. She was Sophia. She was a daughter. She was a sister. She was an artist. She was loved. She was loved so much. I walked back to the evidence table, my legs feeling like they were made of water. I picked up the small evidence bag containing the silver swallow necklace, holding it up for the jury to see. This was hers. She told me swallows always find their way home. She never did. But I have found her. And I am here, now, to speak for her. Not as a prosecutor, but as her sister. To tell you the truth that has been buried for 20 years. The judge told me to speak the truth. He didn't know the victim was my sister. But I did. And I can be silent no longer. I placed the necklace back on the table with a soft, final click. The courtroom was utterly, profoundly still. You could have heard a pin drop, a breath, a heartbeat. I had just torpedoed my case. I had committed professional suicide. I had broken every rule in the book, violated every oath I had ever taken. But for the first time since I saw that evidence photo, since I was 10 years old, I could breathe. The weight of the lie was gone. Judge Henderson was silent for a long, long time. He looked from me, standing vulnerable before the jury, to the stunned faces of the jurors, to the furious, frustrated defense attorney. Ms. Rostova, he said, his voice heavy, laden with a complexity of emotion, disappointment, perhaps, but also something else, something that might have been respect, or pity, or understanding. Approach the bench. Counsel, as well. I walked forward, my legs weak, my body feeling hollowed out. Ms. Flores joined me, her face flushed with anger. Your Honor, I move for an immediate mistrial. This is a gross, prejudicial, and unethical violation of my client's rights to a fair trial. Ms. Rostova has poisoned the entire jury pool. She should be held in contempt and reported to the Bar Association immediately. Judge Henderson ignored her, his gaze fixed on me. Why, Elena? He asked, and for the first time, he used my first name, stripping away the formality, speaking to me as a person. Why would you do this? You are one of the best prosecutors I have ever seen. You have jeopardized everything. Your career. This case. Everything. I looked him in the eye, all my defense is gone, all my pretense is vanished. There was nothing left but the raw, unvarnished truth. Because the truth was the only thing left I could give her, Your Honor. I became a lawyer to find justice for victims. How could I deny it to my own sister? How could I stand here and call her Jane Doe when I knew her name? The law is about truth, and I finally told it. He studied me for what felt like an eternity, his wise, old eyes seeing everything, the decades of grief, the impossible choice, the shattered professional, the loyal sister. Then he sighed, a deep, weary sound that seemed to come from the very foundations of the courthouse itself. The court is in recess. I will hear arguments on the motion for a mistrial in my chambers in 1 hour. Ms. Rostova, you will wait in my chambers now. Bailiff, escort the jury out. The next few hours were a blur, a slow-motion nightmare. I sat in the judge's quiet, wood-paneled chambers, surrounded by the leather-bound books of law that had been my Bible, waiting for the end of my career. The room smelled of old books and lemon polish, the scent of the institution I had betrayed. Ben came in at one point, closing the door softly behind him. His face was a mixture of betrayal and awe. "You should have told me, Elena," he said, his voice quiet. "I could have helped you. We could have figured something out. Gone to Carson together. Something." I shook my head, a sad, slow movement. There was no help for this, Ben. It was a path I had to walk alone. There was no right way to do the wrong thing, and no wrong way to do the right thing. I got them tangled up, and now I have to face the consequences. When Judge Henderson, D.A. Carson, and Ms. Flores finally entered, the air was thick with tension. Carson looked like he wanted to strangle me, his face a mottled red, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Your Honor, the district attorney's office will be withdrawing from this case immediately and will be filing for a mistrial. Ms. Rostova is, of course, suspended indefinitely pending a full review and almost certain disbarment proceedings by the Bar Association. Her conduct is an embarrassment to this office and to the entire legal profession." "That is a given, Robert," Judge Henderson said, his voice tired. He turned to me. "Ms. Rostova, your actions today were a profound and unequivocal breach of legal ethics. You deceived the court. You deceived your office. You potentially compromised a man's right to a fair trial. There will be consequences. Severe ones. You understand that?" "I do, Your Honor," I said, my voice steady. There was a strange peace in having no more decisions to make, no more lies to tell. "However," he continued, his voice softening a fraction, "this court is not blind to human emotion. Nor is it deaf to the power of truth. The law is not a machine, though we often treat it as one. It is meant to serve justice, and sometimes, justice requires more than just the cold facts in a file. It requires context. It requires a name. It requires a heart." He looked at Ms. Flores. "Your motion for a mistrial is granted. This trial is over." Then he looked back at me, and his eyes held not condemnation, but a deep, weary sadness. "But the case is not. The charges against Mr. Thorne still stand. A new prosecutor will be appointed. And the truth you spoke today, Ms. Rostova, while improperly delivered, will now be a part of the official record. Jane Doe has a name. She has a family. She has a story. That changes everything. It changes how the new prosecutor will approach the case. It changes how a new jury will see the victim. It changes everything." It was more than I could have hoped for. It wasn't absolution, but it was a chance. A chance for Sophia to have a real trial, for her story to be told correctly, for her to be seen as a person, not a statistic. It was a victory snatched from the jaws of my own personal and professional defeat. I stood to leave, my body feeling 1,000 years old, every step an effort. "One more thing, Elena," the judge said. He wasn't looking at me as a judge anymore, but as an old man who had seen too much human pain, too much complexity to believe in simple black and white. "Go home. Tell your parents. They deserve to hear it from you, not from the evening news. They have waited long enough for the truth." I drove to my parents' house on autopilot, the familiar streets passing in a blur. The sun was setting, casting long, deep shadows that seemed to mirror the darkness inside me. I found them in the living room, just as I had a few nights before, my father reading his newspaper, my mother knitting. The picture of fragile, painful normalcy. I didn't sit down. I just stood in the doorway, the truth a heavy, final stone in my mouth that I had to spit out. "Mama. Papa," I said, my voice raw from crying, from the trial, from a lifetime of silence. "I found Sophia." My mother's knitting needle stilled. My father slowly, deliberately, lowered his paper. He folded it neatly, precisely, a gesture of pure control, and placed it on the table beside him. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet, a whisper that carried more threat than a shout. "She's gone, Papa," I said, the words blunt, unable to be softened. "She's been gone for a while. She didn't run away. She was lost. She was struggling. She was living on the streets. And a few months ago, a man, he gave her drugs, and she died. She's dead." The silence that followed was worse than any outburst. It was a void, a chasm opening up in the middle of the floral living room rug. My mother made a small, choked sound, like a wounded animal, a gasp of pure, undiluted agony. Her hands flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with a horror I had never seen before. My father just stared at me, his face a rigid, uncomprehending mask. The newspaper, so neatly folded, crumpled in his tightening grip. How do you know this?" he whispered, the words barely audible,